Duke Sebastian Marlowe tore his wife's tide chart in half and declared her unfit to command Blackthorn Lighthouse. The sound of splitting parchment cut through the council chamber more sharply than a pistol shot. "You have allowed sentiment and superstition to govern a station vital to this coast," Sebastian said. "Your authority ends today." Duchess Adelaide Marlowe stood at the opposite end of the long oak table, surrounded by harbor magistrates, shipowners, naval officers, and tenants whose families had trusted her signals for 7 years. Beside her lay the lighthouse ledger, 3 current charts, and a sealed warning she had written to the Admiralty. Sebastian did not touch the warning. He handed the lighthouse keys to his cousin, Gideon Marlowe. Gideon accepted them with a solemn expression that failed to conceal the satisfaction in his eyes. "I shall restore discipline to Blackthorn Bay." Adelaide looked directly at her husband. "Your cousin has never navigated the western reefs. He will have experienced keepers beneath him. 2 keepers resigned last week. A third disappeared." A murmur passed around the table. Sebastian's jaw tightened. Adelaide recognized the warning in his face. He had worn the same expression whenever her knowledge contradicted him before other men. Gideon placed one hand over the keys. "The missing keeper was dismissed for drunkenness. He sent me a message before he vanished." Adelaide lifted the sealed letter. "He reported unauthorized signal tests after midnight and ships entering through Widow's Channel without customs inspection." Sebastian did not open it. Instead, he pushed the torn halves of her chart toward her. "This council has heard enough accusations unsupported by proof." Adelaide stared at the jagged line running through the bay she had mapped with her father as a girl. Every depth notation and current mark represented months spent aboard small boats in violent water. Sebastian once said her charts had saved more lives than all the prayers spoken in Blackthorn's chapel. Now he had destroyed one to impress the Admiralty officials seated at his right. 2 guards approached her. "You cannot give Gideon command tonight," Adelaide said. "The moon and current will conceal the southern rocks. 3 vessels are expected before dawn." Gideon leaned back. "Merchant ships arrive every week. These have not registered their cargo." Sebastian rose. "Escort the Duchess from the tower." For one suspended moment, Adelaide searched her husband's face for the man who had once climbed the lighthouse stairs, simply to bring her supper. She found only wounded pride and political hunger. She removed the silver chain of office from her neck and placed it beside Gideon's hand. "If one sailor dies because you refuse to examine that letter," she said quietly, "the sea will not accept ignorance as your defense." Sebastian looked away first. Adelaide was allowed to leave, carrying only her father's brass telescope. From the carriage, she watched Blackthorn Lighthouse recede behind her, a pale stone tower rising above black cliffs, its lantern room catching the last red light of evening. The guards delivered her to an isolated dower house 2 miles inland. Sebastian had ordered the servants withdrawn and the horses removed. Every window facing the coast had been shuttered. He had not merely dismissed her, he had ensured she could neither observe the lighthouse nor reach it. Adelaide waited until the guards departed, then climbed to the attic. She forced open the coastal shutter with the telescope's leather case and raised the instrument toward the distant headland. At 11 minutes past midnight, the lighthouse went dark. Her breath stopped. 1 minute passed. Then 2. When the beam returned, it did not shine from Blackthorn Point. A second light was flashing from Ravenhead, nearly a mile east of the true station. Its rhythm perfectly imitated the Blackthorn signal, inviting approaching vessels to turn directly toward a submerged ridge of granite. Adelaide counted 3 sets of lights beyond the bay. 3 ships were obeying it. She ran downstairs and seized a storm lantern, but the front door had been locked from the outside. With no horse and no servant to summon, she smashed a kitchen window, wrapped her bleeding palm in her handkerchief, and climbed through. The first cannon sounded as she reached the cliff road. The second came moments later. The third was abruptly cut short. By the time Adelaide reached the shore, the sea had swallowed every ship's light. Fishermen gathered along the beach, while wreckage drifted in with the tide. Gideon arrived with armed customs officers and immediately accused Adelaide of sabotaging the station. They discovered contraband barrels beneath her former office and a letter promising her payment for extinguishing the true light. Sebastian came last. He looked from the forged letter to his wife's bleeding hand. "Tell me you did not do this." Adelaide raised her father's telescope toward the dark water. For a single instant, one missing ship emerged between the waves and hoisted a Royal Navy recognition flag. Official records had identified all 3 vessels as ordinary merchants. "These ships were never carrying contraband," she whispered. Before Sebastian could answer, a customs officer dragged a body from the surf. Around the dead man's wrist was a royal dispatch chain, and clenched inside his fist was a strip of parchment bearing Sebastian's private seal. Sebastian took the parchment from the dead courier's fist. His private seal, a black wolf beneath a ducal coronet, had been pressed into crimson wax. The impression was flawless, down to the hairline crack running through the wolf's right foreleg. Only 3 people possessed authorized access to that seal: Sebastian, his secretary, and Adelaide. Gideon stepped closer. The Duchess kept the household keys for years. She could have ordered an impression made at any time. Adelaide crouched beside the body. The courier's coat was torn at the shoulder, but his boots were nearly clean. A man washed from a wreck should have carried sand, weed, or fragments of timber. This man had not come from the sea. "Do not touch him," she said. Sebastian's voice hardened. "You are in no position to issue commands. He has no seawater in his lungs." Every man on the beach turned toward her. Adelaide pointed to the faint bruising around the courier's throat. He was strangled before he was placed in the surf. Gideon scoffed. "You are a lighthouse keeper, not a physician. My father taught me to recognize drowned sailors. This man's face is pale, not swollen. His hands show no damage from fighting the current, and his dispatch chain has not begun to tarnish." Sebastian knelt reluctantly. He touched the courier's sleeve, then looked at Gideon. "It is almost dry." A bell rang from the harbor. One of the fishermen shouted that wreckage had entered the northern inlet. Adelaide seized a lantern and followed the men along the beach. Sebastian ordered 2 officers to remain with the body, but Gideon sent one away to search the dower house. The wreckage proved to be part of a ship's rail, freshly splintered and marked with blue paint. Adelaide ran her thumb across it. "There is no barnacle growth," she said, "and no trace of impact against rock." Sebastian's expression darkened. "Then where did it come from?" "It was broken deliberately," Gideon interrupted. "Or she prepared it in advance." Adelaide turned on him. "If 3 ships struck Raven Ridge, the bay would be covered with cargo, timber, bodies, and oil." "Where are they?" No one answered. The 3 vessels had not sunk. They had followed the false light into a concealed channel beyond Ravenhead and disappeared from view. The cannon shots had been part of the deception, perhaps signals rather than pleas for rescue. A customs lieutenant returned carrying a leather folder taken from the dead courier. Inside was a passenger manifest naming officials, naval engineers, and a confidential envoy of the king. A second page listed sealed iron chests transported under Admiralty authority. Sebastian read it twice. "Why was I not informed of this convoy?" "Perhaps you were," Adelaide said, looking at the parchment bearing his seal. For the first time, uncertainty crossed his face. Gideon reached for the manifest. "These papers must be secured at the lighthouse." "No," Adelaide said. "Nothing should be returned there until every keeper has been questioned." Sebastian hesitated. It was the choice Adelaide had begged him to make inside the council chamber. Pause, investigate, and deny Gideon unrestricted control. Instead, Sebastian folded the manifest and handed it to his cousin. "You will place this in the signal safe." Adelaide stared at him. "You have just discovered a murdered royal courier and a forged order bearing your seal, and I have discovered contraband beneath your office. Contraband found by Gideon's men after he took command." Gideon's face remained calm, but his thumb pressed hard against the lighthouse keys. Sebastian ordered Adelaide confined at Marlowe Hall until a magistrate could examine the evidence. 2 officers escorted her to the Duke's carriage while search parties spread along the coast. As they passed the harbor warehouses, Adelaide noticed 3 heavy wagons standing beneath the customs arch. Their canvas covers were wet, although no rain had fallen. Blue paint marked one wheel, the same blue as the false wreckage. She leaned toward the carriage window. One cover shifted in the wind, revealing an iron chest stamped with the Admiralty cipher. The missing convoy's cargo had already been brought ashore. "Stop the carriage!" Adelaide cried. The driver whipped the horses faster. One officer seized her arm, but she struck the carriage roof with her father's telescope. The brass tube opened at the impact, exposing a narrow compartment hidden inside its handle. A tightly rolled chart fell into her lap. Adelaide recognized her father's handwriting and the outline of a forgotten tunnel running from Ravenhead to the cellars of Marlowe Hall. Beside the tunnel entrance, he had written a single warning: never allow a Marlowe to control both the lighthouse and the customs gate. Before Adelaide could read further, the officer beside her drew a knife. "Give me the chart, Your Grace." Adelaide rolled the chart around her bleeding palm and drove her elbow into the officer's throat. He lunged for her again, but the carriage struck a rut. His knife sliced through her sleeve instead of her arm. Adelaide threw open the door and jumped. She hit the roadside hard enough to drive the breath from her lungs. Behind her, the officer shouted for the driver to stop. Adelaide forced herself upright and ran into the trees. Branches tore at her gown as she followed the distant sound of waves. She could not return to the harbor, where Gideon controlled the customs officers, and Sebastian had ordered her confined. Her father's chart offered only one possible refuge: the forgotten tunnel beneath Ravenhead. She reached the cliff path minutes before the officer emerged from the woods. The chart marked the entrance behind a ruined fisherman's chapel. Adelaide found an iron ring concealed beneath ivy and pulled open a narrow stone door. She slipped inside and dragged it shut. The tunnel smelled of salt, earth, and lamp oil. Not forgotten then. Fresh wheel tracks cut through the mud. Wooden braces had recently been installed along the walls, and boot prints led toward Marlowe Hall. Adelaide followed them until voices echoed ahead. She extinguished her lantern and moved closer. Through a gap in the rock, she saw a cavern connected to the sea. The 3 missing ships were anchored inside it, their masts lowered beneath the cliff. Armed men carried Admiralty chests onto the same blue-wheeled wagons she had seen at the customs gate. The convoy had been captured intact. A gray-haired naval officer stood bound beside the water. Adelaide recognized Rear Admiral Ashford, one of the king's most trusted advisors. Gideon approached him, holding the stolen passenger manifest. "You will open the final chest," Gideon said. Ashford spat blood at his boots. "Only the royal envoy knows the cipher. Then we shall wait for him to regain consciousness." The envoy was alive. Adelaide shifted to see farther into the cavern. A second prisoner lay behind the wagons, his face covered by a blood-stained coat. Then she heard Sebastian's name. "The Duke has signed every authorization we require," Gideon told one of his men. "By tomorrow, the convoy will appear to have been destroyed while carrying contraband under Duchess Adelaide's protection. Marlowe will demand her prosecution himself. And, when he discovers the ships, he will not. By then, every chest will be in his cellars." The man glanced toward the tunnel. "That places the evidence beneath his own house." "Precisely." Adelaide understood the trap. Gideon intended to steal the crown's cargo, condemn her as a smuggler, and leave Sebastian appearing to be the nobleman who had concealed stolen Admiralty property on his estate. Her husband's ambition had made him useful. His signatures had opened the customs gate. His public accusation had discredited the only person capable of identifying the false signal, and his decision to give Gideon the lighthouse had completed the scheme. A stone shifted beneath Adelaide's shoe. The voices stopped. She retreated into darkness as 2 armed men entered the passage. One carried a pistol, the other raised a lantern. Adelaide pressed herself into a narrow recess. The first man passed without seeing her, but the lantern light caught the pale fabric of her torn sleeve. "There!" She struck the lantern from his hand and ran. A pistol fired. Stone splintered beside her face. Adelaide followed the chart toward Marlowe Hall, but the passage divided unexpectedly. One route climbed toward the estate cellars, the other descended beneath the lighthouse. She chose the lighthouse. The tunnel ended behind a wooden panel in the signal room. Adelaide pushed through and found the chamber deserted. On the desk lay the supposedly secure passenger manifest Sebastian had entrusted to Gideon. Several names had been crossed out. Beside it rested a packet of letters bearing Adelaide's forged signature, detailed payments from smugglers, and orders instructing the keepers to alter the beam. Gideon had prepared enough evidence to ensure she would hang. Footsteps thundered up the stairs. Adelaide seized the manifest and searched for another exit. Behind the signal mechanism, she found the missing pages from the original lighthouse ledger. One entry had been written 6 months earlier. Duke Sebastian Marlowe authorized Gideon Marlowe to conduct unrestricted night signals and exempt designated vessels from inspection. Sebastian's signature was genuine. The tower door opened below. Adelaide climbed onto the exterior gallery as Gideon's men entered the signal room. Wind tore at her hair, and the Black Sea crashed against the cliffs 200 feet beneath her. Across the bay, torches were moving toward Marlowe Hall. Sebastian was returning home, unaware that stolen royal cargo was already being carried into his cellars. Then the lighthouse beam swept across the water. In its light, Adelaide saw a 4th ship approaching Ravenhead. It carried the royal standard. The king's ship was sailing directly toward the false channel. Adelaide had less than 10 minutes to turn it away. Behind her, Gideon's men forced open the gallery door. She struck the iron latch with her father's telescope, jamming it into place, then ran around the narrow exterior platform toward the lantern mechanism. The lighthouse beam swept east again, wrong by 3 degrees. Adelaide opened the maintenance panel and found that the rotation chain had been shortened with a newly forged link. She could not correct the angle without stopping the light entirely. A pistol shattered the glass beside her. "Step away from the mechanism!" a man shouted through the door. Adelaide pulled the emergency lever. The beam went dark. Below, alarm bells erupted across Blackthorn Bay. Without the lighthouse, the royal ship slowed, but it did not change course. Adelaide needed a signal its captain could understand. She seized the red warning screen and held it before the lamp as the mechanism restarted. Red light swept across the sea once, vanished, then returned twice. "Danger. False passage. Turn west," the ship answered with a cannon shot. It had seen her. A second pistol ball struck the metal frame. Adelaide released the screen as Gideon's men broke through the door. One grabbed her from behind, but she drove the brass telescope into his knee and tore free. The other raised his pistol. "Alive," Gideon called from the stairs. "I want her alive." Adelaide turned toward him. "So I can confess before you hang me? So your husband can hear you admit that every death was your doing." Gideon entered the lantern room holding Sebastian's sealed warning, the letter Adelaide had placed before the council. Its wax remained unbroken. "You never read it," she said. "I did. Your husband did not." He dropped the letter into the lamp flame. Adelaide lunged, but Gideon caught her wrist. The paper curled between them as the names of the compromised keepers disappeared into fire. "You relied upon Sebastian's judgment," Gideon murmured. "That was your only serious mistake." A horn sounded from the royal ship. It had turned west, away from Raven Ridge. Gideon's composure finally cracked. He ordered one man to signal the cavern and another to seize Adelaide. She twisted away, kicked open the maintenance gate, and descended the ladder bolted to the tower's exterior. The wind swung her against the stone. Her injured hand slipped, but she caught the lowest rung before falling. Above, Gideon leaned over the gallery. "Seal the tunnel." Adelaide reached the rocks as armed men poured from the lighthouse entrance. She crossed a narrow ledge and jumped into a fishing boat tethered below the cliff. A familiar voice called from the darkness. "Adelaide." Sebastian stood in another boat with 2 estate guards. He had seen the altered beam from the harbor and followed it to the tower. She rowed toward him. "The ships are hidden beneath Ravenhead. Gideon is moving the Admiralty chests into your cellars." Sebastian stared at her. "That is impossible. I heard him say it. And I found your forged letters beside the missing pages of the signal ledger." His face changed at the word forged, but suspicion remained. Adelaide handed him the genuine ledger entry authorizing Gideon's unrestricted signals. Sebastian held it near the guard's lantern. "That permission concerned survey vessels," he said. "Did you verify them?" Gideon presented Admiralty credentials. "Did you verify those?" Sebastian fell silent. A cannon thundered behind them. The royal ship fired upon the false signal station at Ravenhead. Flames rose from the cliff, illuminating the concealed entrance to the cavern. For one instant, Sebastian saw the masts of the 3 missing ships beneath the rock. The proof stood before him. Then an explosion tore through the headland. Gideon was destroying the cavern with the prisoners and ships still inside. Adelaide pulled the hidden chart from her sleeve. "There is another entrance through your wine cellar." Sebastian ordered the boat turned toward Marlowe Hall. They reached the estate as smoke began rising from its lower windows. Servants fled across the lawn while armed customs officers guarded the doors. Sebastian stepped forward. "This is my house. Stand aside." Their commander raised a warrant bearing a ministerial seal. "Duke Sebastian Marlowe, you are under arrest for the theft of crown property, the disappearance of a royal convoy, and conspiracy against His Majesty." Sebastian looked toward the burning cellar windows. Gideon had moved faster than either of them expected. The officers seized him. Adelaide tried to intervene, but the commander unfolded a second warrant. This one named her as the architect of the entire conspiracy. Behind the flames, someone began pounding desperately against a locked cellar door. Adelaide recognized the voice crying for help. It belonged to the royal envoy. Adelaide tore free of the officer holding her and ran toward the burning cellar windows. "Stop her!" the commander shouted. Sebastian blocked the officers long enough for her to reach the side of the house. Smoke poured through the iron grating, but the royal envoy's pounding continued beneath it. The wine cellar entrance was locked. Adelaide seized an axe from a fleeing servant and struck the door beside the hinges. Sebastian reached her with one wrist already shackled. "The tunnel entrance is behind the northern rack," she said. He took the axe with his free hand and broke through the final panel. Together they entered the cellar as smoke rolled along the ceiling. Several Admiralty chests stood among the wine barrels. Gideon had arranged them beneath Sebastian's house exactly as planned. Papers bearing the Duke's signature lay openly atop them, ready for the Crown's investigators to discover. Adelaide found the northern rack and pulled the third bottle from its lowest row, following her father's chart. A concealed catch released, exposing a stone passage. The royal envoy lay chained just inside it. Sebastian smashed the chain while Adelaide dragged the man away from the smoke. His temple was bleeding, but he remained conscious. "Rear Admiral Ashford," Adelaide said. "Is he still in the cavern?" The envoy nodded weakly. Gideon took him aboard the final ship. What was inside the sealed chests? Coastal defense plans, naval payroll, and a list of Crown informants operating in French ports. Sebastian looked toward the crates surrounding them. "If those names leave England, dozens of men will be executed," the envoy replied. A burning beam collapsed behind them. The tunnel to Ravenhead was still passable, but flames were spreading through the cellar. Adelaide helped the envoy toward the outer door, while Sebastian examined one of the documents planted on the chests. His face hardened. "This is my signature. Did you sign it?" Adelaide asked. "I signed a blank authorization for Gideon 3 months ago. He claimed an Admiralty inspection could not be delayed." Sebastian finally looked at her without defensiveness. "I gave him everything he required. There was no time for absolution, and Adelaide offered none. Then help me prevent him from using it again." They brought the envoy outside, where the arresting commander immediately recognized him. He ordered Sebastian's shackles removed, but did not withdraw either warrant. "Until we understand what happened, both of you remain under guard." The envoy gripped the commander's sleeve. "If Gideon's ship reaches open water, the Crown loses every informant named in those chests." Adelaide spread her father's chart across the carriage bonnet. "The cavern has a second sea passage here. Gideon will leave through it before the tide falls, but the channel narrows beside Widow's Teeth. A large ship cannot cross unless it follows an exact current." The commander glanced at the burning lighthouse. "And who knows that current?" "I do." Sebastian ordered his fastest cutter prepared. The commander objected, but the royal envoy overruled him and placed 6 Marines aboard under Adelaide's direction. As they pushed away from shore, Adelaide saw servants carrying the stolen chests from Marlowe Hall. Every object removed from the cellar strengthened the case that Gideon had built against her husband. Sebastian stood beside her at the bow. "You warned me," he said. She kept her eyes on the dark channel. "Repeatedly. I believed you resented Gideon because my father once considered him the better heir. You believed that because it excused you from examining his credentials." The words struck harder than anger. Sebastian turned away. At Widow's Teeth, Adelaide ordered the sails lowered and guided the cutter between 2 rocks barely visible above the waves. Beyond them, a ship emerged from the cavern passage. Gideon stood on its quarterdeck. Rear Admiral Ashford was tied to the mast, and several barrels of gunpowder had been placed around him. Gideon held a burning torch above an open fuse. "Turn back," he called, "or the Admiral dies with every document aboard." The Marines raised their muskets, but Adelaide ordered them not to fire. "One shot could ignite the powder." Sebastian stepped forward. "You cannot escape the bay." Gideon smiled. "I do not need to escape it." He pointed toward the royal ship approaching from the west. Signal flags rose above Gideon's mast, flags identifying his vessel as a captured merchant ship under attack by Duke Sebastian Marlowe. If the royal captain believed them, he would fire upon Adelaide's cutter. Adelaide studied the water around Gideon's ship. The tide had begun to turn, exposing the first black edges of Widow's Teeth. Gideon thought her trapped between his gunpowder and the royal guns. But he had positioned his ship over a current Adelaide had discovered at 16 and never recorded on any official chart. She gave Sebastian the tiller. "Whatever happens," she said, climbing onto the cutter's rail, "do not follow me." Then Adelaide dived into the black water and disappeared beneath Gideon's ship. The current seized Adelaide before the cold could. She let it pull her beneath Gideon's hull, counting the seconds between waves. When her shoulders struck the anchor cable, she wrapped both arms around it and dragged herself toward the surface. Above her, Gideon shouted orders. The royal ship had answered his false flags. Its gun ports were opening. Adelaide climbed the cable until she reached the lower deck, where an unlocked cargo hatch stood inches above the waterline. She forced it open and slipped inside. The hold was filled with Admiralty chests. 3 sailors guarded the main stair, but none watched the stern compartment. Adelaide moved behind stacked crates until she found the ship's steering cables. Her father had taught her that a vessel could survive broken sails or a damaged mast. Destroy its steering at the wrong moment, however, and the sea would choose its course. She took a marlinspike from the wall and loosened the starboard cable. A cannon fired. The shot struck the water beside Sebastian's cutter. Gideon's deception had succeeded. Adelaide severed the cable. The ship turned violently toward Widow's Teeth. Sailors fell across the deck as Gideon screamed for the helm to be corrected. Adelaide climbed the stern ladder and emerged behind the quarterdeck. Rear Admiral Ashford saw her first, but gave no sign. Gunpowder barrels surrounded him, their fuse running to the torch in Gideon's hand. The ship scraped a submerged rock. Gideon stumbled, and the torch fell. Adelaide lunged across the deck. She caught it before it touched the fuse, but one of Gideon's men seized her hair and dragged her backward. She drove the torch into his coat. He released her with a cry. "Take her alive!" Gideon shouted. Adelaide threw the burning torch into the sea. The royal ship fired again. This time Sebastian turned the cutter directly into the shot's path and raised Adelaide's torn tide chart above his head. The captain recognized the emergency markings she had drawn along its border. The royal guns fell silent. Gideon grabbed Adelaide by the throat. "You should have accepted your disgrace and allowed you to blame me for your treason? I did not require your guilt, only Sebastian's belief in it." He pushed her against the mast. "Your husband wanted the Admiralty to see him as decisive. I merely gave him a wife to sacrifice." Adelaide struck his wounded knee with the marlinspike. As he collapsed, she cut Ashford's bonds. The Admiral seized a fallen pistol and ordered the crew to surrender. Several sailors lowered their weapons, but Gideon's lieutenant raised a musket toward Adelaide. A shot cracked across the water. The lieutenant fell. Sebastian stood aboard the cutter, smoke curling from his pistol. Marines boarded Gideon's vessel from both sides. Within minutes, the surviving conspirators were disarmed, and the gunpowder fuse was thrown overboard. Gideon was nowhere among the prisoners. Adelaide found the stern hatch open. "He has gone into the water," she said. Sebastian searched the black waves, but the current flowed toward the hidden cavern. Gideon knew the tunnel system well enough to return to Marlowe Hall, or disappear beyond the estate. Rear Admiral Ashford opened one of the Admiralty chests. It was empty. They opened a second, then a third. All the intelligence documents were gone. "The papers in Sebastian's cellar were decoys," Adelaide said. Gideon transferred the real lists elsewhere before leaving the cavern. Ashford faced the captured sailors. "Where?" No one answered. Adelaide searched the captain's cabin. She found damp charts, forged customs seals, and coded payment records. Inside Gideon's desk lay a miniature portrait of a woman Adelaide recognized. Lady Honoria Vale, Sebastian's widowed aunt. She had raised both Sebastian and Gideon after their parents died. She also controlled the Marlowe family trust and had publicly supported Adelaide's removal from the lighthouse. A folded note was hidden behind the portrait. "Bring the crown lists to the old chapel before sunrise. Once Sebastian and his wife are condemned, Blackthorn passes to its rightful blood." The handwriting belonged to Honoria. Sebastian read the message in silence. "My aunt cannot inherit the dukedom," he said. "No," Adelaide replied. "But Gideon can." Rear Admiral Ashford examined the payment records. "Only if you die without a legitimate child." Adelaide felt Sebastian's attention turn toward her. 3 months earlier, she had suffered a miscarriage after being left alone at the Dower House during Sebastian's first political visit to London. Only family members and their physician knew she had later begun to suspect that the medicine given to her had caused it. Adelaide looked again at Honoria's note. This conspiracy had not begun with the lighthouse. Before she could speak, a Marine entered the cabin, carrying a message recovered from a signal pigeon. Gideon had already reached the old chapel, and he had taken the Marlowe family physician with him. Adelaide read the pigeon message twice. "Bring the physician and the original treatment ledger. Burn both before sunrise." The medicine that had ended her pregnancy was not a separate tragedy. It was part of the same plan, to remove Sebastian, destroy their marriage, and clear Gideon's path to Blackthorn. Sebastian reached for the message. Adelaide folded it and kept it in her hand. "You do not get to take this from me." His face tightened, not with anger, but shame. "I was told the child could not have survived. You were told many things. You chose which ones were convenient to believe." The words silenced him. Rear Admiral Ashford ordered 4 Marines to escort them ashore. Gideon's ship was stranded against Widow's Teeth, and the tide was falling too quickly for the royal vessel to approach the chapel landing. Adelaide guided the cutter into a narrow inlet beneath the ruins. The old chapel stood above them, abandoned since a cliff collapse had destroyed its graveyard. One window glowed with candlelight. Adelaide led the Marines through the burial passage. Near the vestry, she heard Lady Honoria's voice. "You assured me the Duchess would be hanged before she could question the medicine." A man answered shakily, I altered the dosage as instructed. I did not agree to murder a royal envoy. Adelaide recognized Dr. Silas Mercer. Through the broken door, she saw him bound to a chair beside a leather ledger. Honoria stood before the altar, holding the missing crown documents. Gideon, soaked from the sea, poured lamp oil across the floor. Sebastian moved toward the entrance, but Adelaide stopped him. If you confront them now, Gideon burns everything. What do you propose? That you trust my judgment once, without taking command of it. Sebastian held her gaze, then stepped back. Adelaide remembered a ventilation shaft marked on her father's chart. She led 2 Marines beneath the vestry, while Sebastian and Ashford positioned the others at the chapel doors. The shaft opened behind the altar. Adelaide climbed through, just as Gideon struck a match. She kicked the oil lamp from his hand. Darkness swallowed the chapel. The Marines entered from both doors. Gunfire flashed between the pillars. Honoria tried to throw the crown documents into a brazier, but Adelaide seized the bundle. Gideon escaped through the ruined sacristy, while Sebastian pursued him. Dr. Mercer cried out from beside the altar. A pistol ball had struck his shoulder. Adelaide cut his ropes. "My child," she said. "What did you give me?" Mercer looked toward Honoria, who was held at gunpoint by Rear Admiral Ashford. "Ergot," he whispered. In repeated doses, Adelaide's fingers went numb around the knife. Was the pregnancy already failing? No, the answer emptied the chapel of every other sound. Mercer began to weep. He confessed that Honoria had paid his debts and threatened his daughter. He had altered Adelaide's medicine, falsified the household medical ledger, and told Sebastian that no intervention could have saved the child. Sebastian returned alone through the sacristy. He had heard enough. His face looked stricken, but Adelaide could not comfort him. His grief did not erase the night she had begged him to remain at Blackthorn, nor his decision to leave her under Honoria's care, because an Admiralty dinner mattered more. "Where is Gideon?" Ashford asked. "He took a horse toward the harbor." Honoria laughed softly. "Then you have already lost." Ashford opened the recovered document bundle. Most of the Crown intelligence lists were present, but the final pages, containing the names of agents in Calais, were missing. "Gideon has them," Adelaide said. "He also has your ducal seal," Honoria told Sebastian. "By noon, France will receive the names, and the Crown will receive proof that you sold them." Sebastian stepped toward his aunt. "Why?" "Because Blackthorn should have belonged to Gideon's father. Your branch inherited because of a marriage contract signed by a dying man. So you destroyed Adelaide's child. I corrected an injustice before another generation could continue it." Sebastian recoiled as though she had struck him. Adelaide gathered the medical ledger, pigeon message, forged letters, and surviving Crown lists. The evidence now connected Honoria to the miscarriage and Gideon to the convoy, but it did not yet clear Sebastian of knowingly signing the orders. Nor did it prove Adelaide had not directed the false signals. The only complete signal ledger remained at Blackthorn Lighthouse. A bell began ringing outside. Not the harbor alarm, the execution bell. A Marine entered the chapel and reported that Gideon had returned to Blackthorn village with a magistrate, 2 ministers from London, and signed confessions from 3 lighthouse keepers. He claimed Sebastian had murdered the royal envoy, and Adelaide had fled after betraying the convoy. Under emergency Crown authority, Gideon had ordered them both tried publicly at noon. Adelaide looked through the chapel window. Daylight was spreading across the horizon. They had less than 6 hours to recover the original ledger, expose every forged document, and save the remaining Crown agents. Then a second Marine arrived with worse news. Gideon had taken every lighthouse keeper, and the youngest was Adelaide's 14-year-old nephew. Adelaide's nephew had become Gideon's final shield. Thomas had served as a lighthouse apprentice for less than a year. He knew the signal routines, recognized Adelaide's private chart marks, and had been present when the missing keeper reported unauthorized vessels. If Gideon forced him to confess, the boy's testimony could condemn her. If Thomas told the truth, Gideon would kill him. Adelaide turned to Rear Admiral Ashford. "Take Honoria and Dr. Mercer to the village under naval guard. Do not reveal that the royal envoy survived." Ashford understood immediately. "You want Gideon to believe his account remains unchallenged until he presents every forged document in public." Sebastian stepped closer. "And the lighthouse ledger? I will recover it. We will recover it." Adelaide shook her head. "Gideon expects us together. He still believes you will try to command the harbor while I protect Thomas." Sebastian absorbed the rebuke without resisting it. "What do you need from me?" It was the first time he had asked. Adelaide gave him Honoria's pigeon message. "Return to Marlowe Hall. Bring every servant who saw Gideon's men move the chests into the cellar. Find your secretary and recover the record of the blank authorization you signed. And if the officers arrest me, tell the truth before they ask for it. Sebastian left with 2 Marines. Adelaide crossed the headland alone, using fishermen's paths hidden from the main road. At Blackthorn village, a crowd had already gathered around the market square. Gideon stood on a temporary platform beside the magistrate, wearing dry clothes and Sebastian's ducal signet on his hand. 3 lighthouse keepers knelt below him with their wrists bound. Thomas was not among them. Gideon raised Adelaide's forged payment letter. The Duchess extinguished the true beam in exchange for smuggled gold. When her husband discovered her treachery, he ordered the royal convoy seized to conceal the scandal. The magistrate asked where Sebastian and Adelaide had fled. Toward France, Gideon replied. Adelaide remained behind the cooper's workshop until the crowd turned toward the prisoners. Then she entered the lighthouse through a drainage passage beneath the oil store. The signal room had been stripped. Charts, letters, and maintenance records were gone, but the mechanism still carried the evidence Gideon had overlooked. Adelaide opened the rotation housing and removed the shortened chain. Each link bore the mark of Harland Forge, a business owned through Honoria's family trust. She wrapped it around her waist beneath her cloak. The original ledger was not in the safe. Remembering Gideon's habit of hiding documents behind legitimate records, she climbed into the lantern room and searched beneath the code cabinet. A muffled cry came from below. Adelaide followed it to the keeper's sleeping quarters. Thomas was locked inside a storage chest, gagged and barely conscious. Purple bruises marked his neck. She freed him and pressed water to his lips. "Can you walk?" He nodded, then pulled a small brass plate from his boot. "I took this before they caught me. It was the lighthouse calibration plate, engraved with the correct angle of the beam. Together with the altered chain, it could prove that the light had been deliberately redirected." "Did you see who changed it?" Adelaide asked. "Mr. Gideon. Mr. Pike helped him." Pike was one of the keepers now kneeling in the square. "Why did Pike confess against me?" "They threatened his daughters." A door slammed below. Gideon's men had returned. Adelaide led Thomas onto the gallery, but armed officers surrounded the tower. The cliff ladder had been removed, and the drainage passage was already guarded. "Duchess Adelaide," Gideon called from below, "send the boy down, and you may address the magistrate before sentencing." Thomas trembled. "He will kill us." "No," Adelaide said, fastening the calibration plate inside his coat. "He needs the crowd to believe him." She took his hand and descended. Gideon's smile widened when they emerged. He ordered Thomas separated from her, but the boy clung to Adelaide until 2 officers dragged him away. The crowd fell silent as Adelaide was brought onto the platform. Gideon displayed the forged letters and contraband records. "Do you deny that this is your handwriting?" "I deny that those words are mine." "Convenient. It is also convenient that you discovered them after taking control of my office." The magistrate demanded evidence. Adelaide removed the altered chain from beneath her cloak. This redirected the lighthouse beam toward Ravenhead. "It was forged by a company owned by Lady Honoria Vale." Gideon's expression did not change. "A chain you could have installed yourself. Then ask Keeper Pike who ordered it." Pike looked toward his bound companions, then at Thomas. His courage broke through his fear. "Gideon Marlowe ordered the alteration," he said. The Duchess knew nothing. The square erupted. Gideon drew a pistol and aimed it at Pike, but Adelaide struck his arm with the chain. The shot fired into the air. Before the officers could restrain him, riders entered the square. Sebastian led them. Behind him came the royal envoy, Rear Admiral Ashford, Dr. Mercer, Lady Honoria in shackles, and dozens of servants from Marlowe Hall. Gideon backed toward the harbor. Then he pulled a sealed document from his coat and held it above a lantern. "The final crown list," he shouted. "Arrest them, or every English agent in France dies before sunset." Adelaide studied the seal and realized Gideon was lying. The document in his hand was not the intelligence list. It was the missing final page of the lighthouse ledger, the one record capable of proving exactly who had commanded the false signals, and Gideon was about to burn it before the entire village. Adelaide seized the harbor bell rope and pulled with both hands. The bronze bell thundered above the square. Every fisherman along the quay turned toward her. "Close the harbor gates," she shouted. "No boat leaves Blackthorn." Gideon thrust the ledger page toward the lantern, but Sebastian crossed the platform and overturned the flame. Darkness and smoke swallowed them as Gideon fled toward the docks. Adelaide followed. She knew he still possessed the missing crown list. If he reached even a fishing boat, he could deliver those names to a waiting vessel beyond the bay. Gideon knocked over barrels and crates behind him. Sebastian gained ground. But Adelaide saw what neither man noticed. Gideon was steering them toward the customs warehouse. "He wants the signal rockets," she cried. They entered seconds after him. Gideon fired a pistol from behind a row of cargo. The ball struck Sebastian's shoulder and spun him against the wall. Adelaide dragged him behind an iron-bound crate before the second shot shattered the lantern above them. "Leave me," Sebastian said through clenched teeth. For once, she did not argue. Adelaide moved between the cargo stacks while Gideon searched for the emergency rockets used to summon naval vessels. Through a gap in the crates, she saw him remove a folded paper from inside his boot. The true crown list. He tied it to a signal rocket and aimed the launcher through an open window toward the sea. A black-sailed cutter waited beyond the harbor mouth. Adelaide threw the altered lighthouse chain. It wrapped around Gideon's wrist as he struck the fuse. She pulled hard, wrenching the launcher aside. The rocket fired into the warehouse rafters. Sparks rained onto barrels of lamp oil. Flames spread across the beams. Gideon struck Adelaide and tore free, but the crown list had fallen near the burning crates. She crawled beneath the smoke, caught the page, and pressed it inside her bodice. The warehouse roof began to collapse. Sebastian staggered toward her, one arm hanging uselessly. A burning timber fell between them. "Adelaide, get out!" Gideon reached the rear door first. Before escaping, he lifted his pistol and aimed through the flames at Sebastian. Adelaide pushed her husband aside. The shot missed them both, but Sebastian fell beneath a collapsing shelf. Adelaide could have pursued Gideon. Instead, she used the loosened chain to drag the burning timber from Sebastian's legs. Together they escaped moments before the warehouse roof collapsed. On the quay, Gideon had seized Thomas. He held a knife against the boy's throat and backed toward the last remaining boat. Officers surrounded him but dared not fire. "Clear the harbor gate," Gideon ordered, "or the child dies." Thomas looked at Adelaide. Beneath his fear, she saw that he remembered the calibration plate hidden inside his coat. Adelaide raised both hands and approached. "You have lost the crown list," she said. "The ships, the documents, and your witnesses are under naval control. Thomas has no value to you." "He has value to you, yes." Her answer seemed to surprise him. She continued walking. "I will take his place." Sebastian tried to stop her, but Rear Admiral Ashford held him back. Gideon pushed Thomas toward the officers and dragged Adelaide into the boat. The tide carried them beyond the quay before Gideon found the harbor gate chained shut. He turned the knife toward Adelaide. "You planned this. I closed the harbor before you reached it." A naval launch entered behind them. Ashford's Marines raised their muskets. Gideon pulled Adelaide against his chest. "Order them back." Adelaide looked past him toward the lighthouse. Thomas had reached the signal room and was raising a sequence of flags. Shallow water. Eastern Passage. Adelaide shifted her weight. The boat's keel struck a submerged sandbar. Gideon lost his balance, and she drove her heel into his injured knee. He fell overboard. The current pulled him beneath the chained harbor gate. Marines caught him on the other side and dragged him ashore alive. By noon, the market square had become a public tribunal. Rear Admiral Ashford presented the recovered crown list. Dr. Mercer confessed to poisoning Adelaide's medicine. The keepers testified about the false light. Sebastian's secretary produced the record, proving Gideon had misused a blank authorization. Lady Honoria remained silent until the magistrate displayed her pigeon message. Then she blamed Gideon for everything. Gideon laughed from the prisoner's bench. "You still cannot prove who ordered the convoy taken." The final ledger page burned in the square. Adelaide stepped forward. "No, you only made us believe it had." She opened the sealed document Gideon had tried to burn. It was indeed the missing ledger page, but the signature ordering the false signals had been cut away. Without it, the central command remained unproven. Gideon smiled. Then Thomas approached the tribunal and removed the brass calibration plate from his coat. Hidden behind it was a folded strip of paper. "The missing keeper gave this to me, before Mr. Gideon took him," the boy said. Adelaide unfolded it. It was a copy of the original signal order, witnessed by the keeper and bearing two signatures. One belonged to Gideon, the other belonged to Sebastian. The square went silent. Adelaide turned toward her husband. His face revealed that he recognized the document, and this time, he could not claim he had signed it without knowing what it meant. Sebastian stepped into the center of the tribunal. "I signed that order." The admission moved through the market square in a wave of shocked whispers. Rear Admiral Ashford took the copied document from Adelaide and read its full wording aloud. It authorized Gideon to conduct unrecorded night signals, redirect incoming vessels, and exempt designated cargo from customs inspection. This was no blank page later altered by a conspirator. Sebastian had read it and signed it. Why? The magistrate asked. Sebastian looked at Adelaide before answering. Gideon told me the Admiralty was testing secret coastal routes. He said informing the lighthouse commander would compromise the operation. Your wife was the lighthouse commander? Yes? Did you verify his claim with the Admiralty? No? Did Duchess Adelaide warn you about unauthorized signals? She did. Did you examine her evidence? No. Each answer stripped away another excuse. Sebastian faced the assembled villagers. I wanted an Admiralty appointment. Gideon promised his political allies would support me if I demonstrated that I could control my household and silence opposition. Even when that opposition came from my wife, Lady Honoria closed her eyes. Gideon's smile disappeared. I chose advancement over Adelaide's judgment, Sebastian continued. I signed an authority I had no right to conceal from her. When she warned me, I protected my pride by calling her jealous and irrational. I removed her publicly, placed the lighthouse in Gideon's hands, and made every crime that followed easier to commit. He turned toward Adelaide. No forgery forced me to humiliate you. No deception forced me to ignore your letter. Those choices were mine. Adelaide heard the truth she had once longed for, but it did not restore the child she had lost, the sailors endangered by the false light, or the years in which Sebastian had treated her knowledge as a threat to his authority. The magistrate ordered Gideon and Honoria formally arrested for treason, kidnapping, conspiracy, attempted murder, theft of crown intelligence, and the deliberate poisoning of Adelaide. Dr. Mercer's confession and medical ledger would be presented at trial. Because he had acted under coercion but had knowingly administered the drug, he would also face prosecution, though his cooperation would be considered. The compromised customs officers were removed from duty. Those who had transported the stolen chests willingly were arrested. The men who had obeyed false orders without knowing their purpose were detained as witnesses. Rear Admiral Ashford then addressed Sebastian. Your cooperation recovered the final list, but it does not erase your concealed authorization. The Crown will suspend you from every naval and political office pending a formal inquiry. Sebastian removed his ducal signet and placed it before Ashford. I will not contest the suspension. He publicly withdrew every accusation against Adelaide and declared the documents found in her office to be forgeries, planted after her removal. He restored her command of Blackthorn Lighthouse, transferred the lighthouse lands into the independent trust established by her father, and surrendered all authority over its accounts, keepers, and signals. He also granted pensions to the injured sailors, compensation to the falsely accused keepers, and permanent support to the families endangered by his order. Finally, he produced a signed deed granting Adelaide control of the dower estate and an income independent of their marriage. This cannot repay what I took, he said. It ensures that you will never again depend upon my goodwill to live freely. Adelaide accepted the deed, not his hand. What will become of us? He asked quietly. That is no longer a decision you are entitled to hurry. Sebastian bowed his head. I understand. 3 months later, Gideon and Honoria were convicted. Gideon lost every claim to the Marlowe succession and was sentenced to imprisonment for treason. Honoria's family trust was seized to compensate victims of the conspiracy. Dr. Mercer was stripped of his license and sentenced for his role in the poisoning. Sebastian retained his title but lost his Admiralty ambitions, his seat on the Coastal Council, and much of his political influence. He moved from Marlowe Hall into a modest house inland, while the Crown completed its inquiry. He wrote to Adelaide only once. The letter contained no plea for forgiveness. It listed the repairs he had made, the testimony he had given, and the remaining restitution owed. At the end, he wrote that if she sought a legal separation, he would consent without resistance. Adelaide did not return to Marlowe Hall. She lived at the restored dower estate with Thomas and established a navigation school for the daughters and sons of fishermen. Rear Admiral Ashford appointed her civilian advisor to the Crown's Coastal Safety Commission, granting her authority no husband could revoke. On the first night the rebuilt lighthouse reopened, sailors, villagers, and naval officers gathered at Blackthorn Point. Sebastian stood at the edge of the crowd. Adelaide carried a new tide chart into the signal room. It showed every reef, current, and hidden passage Gideon had exploited. Across its lower corner, she had written the names of the keepers and sailors who had helped expose the conspiracy. She found Sebastian waiting near the council table. In the opening humiliation, he had torn her chart and placed the lighthouse keys in Gideon's hand. Now the keys lay before Adelaide. Sebastian did not touch them. I once believed loving you entitled me to stand above your judgment, he said. I know now that remorse entitles me to nothing. Adelaide studied him for a long moment. I am not ready to forgive you. I know, and I will not return to the marriage we had. I would not ask you to. She saw no demand behind his grief, only acceptance of the consequence he had created. Whether something different could exist between them, one day remained a question for the future, not a reward owed for his confession. Adelaide took the lighthouse keys. Sebastian stepped aside. She climbed the spiral stairs alone, entered the lantern room, and set the restored mechanism into motion. Far below, the first ship waited beyond the reefs. Adelaide adjusted the lens with her own hands. Then the true light swept across Blackthorn Bay.